To make this lecture more engaging, I think it would be ideal to kind of, if you can, practice what you're watching. That would be nice. In the meantime, I strongly encourage you to have, like, if you have some sort of specific questions, like the difference between live demos and a tutorial that you would watch on YouTube is that you may ask like specific questions where like you have that interaction, and you can ask like, if I want to do such and such, what would be the approach? And you know, that's where Morgan's experience would be very valuable here, where they would explain to you what is their thought process and how things would be done. I think it would be also great if you guys maybe follow up with questions, or in the meantime, maybe we can look up resources if needed to provide afterwards. But I'm pretty sure having 2 hours with your focus, full attention on Morgan while taking notes is going to be a really good experience. And yeah, in the meantime, um, Morgan, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much for doing this.
Great, thank you, Ehab. So it looks like David's class did get here, which is good to see. If any of you have Substance Painter, like already installed, you're welcome to just follow along. I'll go ahead and provide the 3D file that I'll be working with. So if any of you have Substance Painter, you should probably open it up and like, you know, at least look at the things that I'm doing. But if you can, you're perfectly welcome to play along. I'm gonna go get my water. I'll be right back.
Hey, David.
Good morning, Ehab.
Morning.
And good morning, Ehab's class. How's everybody doing today?
I'm pretty sure everyone is like, oh, the sun is outside. We should go out as soon as this is ending.
Yeah, I know.
All right, Morgan, go ahead. And everyone else, please make sure you you mute your mic just in case. All right, so go ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted this to be as much of like a discussion than just like a lecture. So I'm going to be talking like throughout, discussing like my thoughts and how I'm going about things. But if anyone else wants to like chime in or ask questions or anything, like, you're perfectly welcome to. Like, I want this to be as much of a discussion as a lecture. So we'll go ahead and share. So this is what like our end goal for the end of this lecture to be. So we've got this dragon model, fully textured in Substance Painter, and we've got the layer stack. And so over the course of the lecture, we'll be building up this layer stack to get the layers of copper and corrosion and stone and all the different materials built up into this like stack of layers. So first I'll show you like what's necessary for you to do to your model to import it. So I've got the base model right here. This is Blender in case you haven't seen it before. So you can use Substance Painter with pretty much any 3D model. The only really important thing for Substance Painter is that you have UVs on it, specifically unique UVs. So what I mean, so I used a automatic UV projection on this, so it looks very dark, but all the UVs are kind of laid out on just the 0 to 1 square with no overlapping. So because there's no overlapping, all the textures will have a unique space. And so since they have the unique space, a texture can wrap around the entire dragon without overlapping itself, which means that we can have a unique texture across the entire space. And that's pretty much the only necessary thing for Substance Painter. That and making sure your normals look decent. So as long as it looks decent in your software and it has unique UVs, you can just go to File, Export, FBX, and Substance Painter just takes normal FBXs, which is what I provided you with the Google download link. Let me open up the chat just in case. So yeah, once you've got the FBX exported, you can open up Substance Painter and go to File. Let's just do New. So this is the new file directory. So you select your FBX file, and just open it up. Template, you should set to PBR metalness roughness is what almost all modern texturing is done in. So this is like the kind of generic, like this is the basic template for texturing. All the other ones go into software specific features. Like the Unreal Engine will do channel packing so that it takes up less space in engine. But by using metalness roughness, we're the most universal. So it can go into any software equally easily without having to fiddle with it. Down a little bit is document resolution. This is just how high res your textures should be while you're working with them. You can always export them at a higher or lower resolution. So this is just kind of what your computer can handle while working with it. I like 1024 or 2048 because those are like nice middle of the road things and my nicer computer can handle them. So that's what I stick with. DirectX, that's just standard, I think. UV tiles, if you want to work with UDIMs, that's kind of UDIMs are a way to like use multiple textures, like a longer texture space, basically. It's used a lot for like characters or other hero assets. I haven't really played with them much. Import cameras if you want specific camera views, and auto unwrap. So if for whatever reason you didn't unwrap your model in your 3D editor, Substance Painter can now do UV unwraps on them. Yes, this is being recorded. So Substance Painter can do automatic UV unwraps now. It's really slow. It's a lot slower than your editor, and it's just kind of a normal automatic UV. So it's not always going to be great. But if you're doing like a bunch of not important stuff, you could probably just turn that on. I've played with it a little bit and it seemed to be fine. If you use ZBrush or something, you might have used that to already bake out normal map from your high poly. So if you already have a normal map specifically for this mesh, you'll add it in here. But that's usually only if you're doing like a sculpt or something, and you baked it in some other software to bring it to Substance Painter. Substance Painter can do its own high poly to low poly baking process. Yeah. So it'll take a little bit to open up. And then you've got your basic scene with nothing in there. Okay, so now you're ready to start the actual texturing process now that your model's in the software and you've got your template set up. The next stage to do is you want to set your source image maps. So the way that Substance Painter works is that you've got this 3D mesh, but you also need to tell the software specific things about the mesh. You need to tell it what direction the surfaces are facing. You need to tell it how thick parts of the model are, like how the horn is a lot thinner than the body. You need to tell that for different effects. And you also need to tell it the cavities, like where dirt would accumulate or where ambient occlusion would be. So to do that, you've got texture set settings. So in the texture set settings, you've got some properties. You have that box again where you can say how big you want to work with your textures. Here you've got your channels. So channels are all the textures you want to be exporting or working with. So I've just got the standard base color, height, roughness, metal, normal as standard PBR metalness roughness works with. These don't matter, but here we've got baked mesh maps, which is what we actually care about. So under baking mesh maps, we've got this new pop-up, and this tells us, this lets the software figure out all those different model properties that I mentioned. So you've got the normal, which is the surface's direction, the world space normal, which tells in relation, like in a global sense. So like everything facing up is that being encoded to a texture. ID mask is only if you're using material segmentation using like different material assignments or vertex colors. I've never really used it. It's useful if you have like, if you did some setup in your 3D editor and want to carry that over, you might be using it for that, but I'll show you the way to do it without that. So check that off because you don't need it. Then we've got ambient occlusion, which is telling the cavities, again, where dirt and stuff would accumulate. Curvature is kind of the opposite. It's how much it's bending away from itself. So that determines like edge wear or like if something's really scratched on the edge. Position is kind of like world space normal, but instead of saying where the surface is pointing, it's saying where it is in the bounding box. Like if you have a gradient texture, it'll be black at the bottom and white at the top, but for each of the three directions. And then thickness tells the model like how thick or thin it is. Like, as I said, the difference between the horn and the body is how thick it is. So those are all pretty important for the software to figure out like its automatic special texturing features. So you definitely need those. This is how large you bake it at. I'll be baking it at 1024, mostly for time purposes. I usually set it as high as the texture that I'm working at, because having it the same resolution is just nice and convenient. Dilation doesn't matter. Diffusion doesn't really matter. So if you're doing a sculpt and baking down the high poly sculpt to your decimated mesh, this is where you do that. So this is the decimated mesh. That's what you imported. Here you can define what high poly mesh you'd be baking down from. I don't have one because I didn't really want to do that, but this is where you would put that. And it automatically use that to figure out like the normal maps and different features will use the high poly instead of the low poly to figure out baking. So yeah, you don't usually need to touch all these settings unless something goes wrong. And if something does go wrong, you just Google it, and usually it works out. And then you just bake it. So here it went through and it baked all the different textures that we wanted. And so you'll see now that it's already a little bit higher visual fidelity because it applied the ambient occlusion to all the cavities. So it already looks a little bit nicer just with this. And you can see that they're all right here. And if you really want to, you can check how they look with these mesh maps. So the normal didn't do anything because that's where the high poly to low poly bake would go. So there's no difference there. World space normal, you can see that greener on the top, less green on the bottom. And like all the other directions have the same, each channel has its own direction that it's encoding. ID is nothing because we didn't need that. Ambient occlusion, it got all the cavities. So the inside of the mouth is dark, where the body gets close to itself is dark. So it determines all these different, like where things are close to each other. Curvature, it didn't really get much because this model doesn't really have very many sharp edges, and it's kind of subtle, but you can see that like it got like some of the edges around the tail and stuff. Position, so it's the same thing. More green up here, less green down here, more red over here, less red over here. So the same kind of encoding just where it is within the bounding box. And then thickness. So this is an interesting view because everything that's really thin, like the tail or the spines are dark and the body itself is white because it's a lot thicker. That's just kind of interesting looking. So yeah. By the way, this is the box that says like how to look at a specific layer. So if you just want to see, you know, our base color layer or like our normal layer, that's where you would set the different view modes. So far they don't have anything because we haven't done anything yet. Yeah. So now that we've got it all set up and baked and everything, we can actually we can actually do material setup. So the first thing that you really want to do is define what different materials this has and where those materials are going to be before you even do like the fun making the textures look good part. You just want to say where they are, because then once you know where they are, you can do like once you have that step, you can really like go into it and refine stuff later. So this is kind of the procedural non-destructive workflow for texturing, and it's just what I always do. So we're going to be doing a folder group for each material that this dragon's going to have. So if you remember, the dragon had a brass body. It had a onyx tummy scales. It had a wooden tongue and a tail fluff, and it had a glowing eyes and a glowing orb. So that's 4 materials. So we're going to make a folder for each one. So we've got the brass body. So when you're naming folders, you want to name it after the material and not like what it's. Okay, so I'm naming it brass and not body because it's a brass material, and that way I can reuse it like across the model or like to other models. If you name it just what it is, you're kind of limiting yourself. So we've got brass, we've got onyx for the stomach, we've got wood, and we've got glow. So it's kind of like a Photoshop document where it organizes itself like this is the bottom layer, and then these are added on top of it. This whole interface is basically like Photoshop, just for 3D. So now we've got the folders. We want a way to visualize the textures as they're going onto the model. So over here, you can add different layers. So I'm going to be doing a fill layer for each one. So we've got our base brass level. So this is kind of doing like a chroma mat, where just assigning random textures or random colors to each part so you can just see them. So I want to add a fill layer in here, and then you got all these settings. So I scroll down to base color, and you can just click on it and change it to whatever color you want. So I'm going to do red because that's easy. Now we're going to do onyx. So I'm doing them random colors and not just the color that they are, because I don't want to be confused of like, oh, this is placeholder, oh, this is final. I want it to be really obvious what's not being worked on yet, so that it doesn't just get like confused in my head. So let's do green, fill layer, drag it under to go into the folder, and then let's do purple. And then we've got the glow. Let's do that yellow. All right, so we've got all these different colors, and they're all just stacked on top of each other, so we can only really see the top one. So now to fix that, I'm going to be adding masks for each one. So we've got the brass layer, and I want that to be like the base. If nothing else is colored, it should be brass. So I'm going to leave that with no mask. But for onyx, that should only be the belly. So I'm going to go and right click. We've got all these options, but we only care about black mask. So now it went away because, you know, a black mask, everything's being hidden by that. But we can manipulate that. So we've got this black mask. We can directly paint it, but it's not really, when you paint directly into it, it's not really going anywhere. It's kind of just in the mask. So the ideal workflow is to right click on the mask and do add paint. So this way you've got like a little tile that your paint's being stored in, so you can add additional effects or do multiple revisions on it if you want it. It's just a safer way to manage your mask data, if that makes sense. So now we've got this mask that we can paint into safely. So you can just go in and paint directly into the mask. And that's what we'll end up doing, but there's other ways to manipulate your mask. So over here, you've got your toolbar. So you can do painting. You've got an eraser. A lot of these tools are like Photoshop. You know, the brushes have different like textures and stuff you can apply to them. We've got, what is this? Projection. So projections, like if you have like a texture stencil and you're just stamping it onto the model, which we'll go over later. Polygon fill. Usually, I bounce between polygon fill and brush for masking. So polygon fill is good if you did really nice custom UVs, because then you can go over to up here. You've got triangle fill, so that's you can paint each triangle with like a bounding box. You can do that, but for just the polygons instead of the triangulated one. But it's pretty similar in this because it's all tries. And then you can do fill in everything that's a connected mesh. And so since this is all connected, it'll get the whole thing, but normally it would get each object that's linked to itself. But the interesting one is UV tile fill. So every UV shell will be considered individually and filled in. On this one, it doesn't really make much sense because I just automatically UV'd it and it didn't look great. But normally, if you put any thought or effort at all into your UVs, you can use that to easily segment what should be a different material. But that didn't happen on this one, so we're just going to paint it.
I just want to mention, sorry, Morgan.
Yeah, you're fine.
In terms of the polygonal selection, painting with polygons, I find it really useful, especially if you guys are not using, for instance, like a pen. If you sometimes you don't have the tablet with you, and it's really helpful because you cannot really brush with the mouse properly. The other thing is that sometimes when you're working with really delicate UV in a way that it's highly economic, and you don't have the ability to just paint everything with a brush, because there could be sometimes objects really close to each other, but the UV is really limiting, and then you can easily paint on accidentally on other shells. So sometimes you can go, if you can show us, Morgan, the 2D view as well alongside with the, yeah, so you can go on the right side and you can like select the polygons exactly the way you want them. And the shortcut between these, the 2D and 3D, I think it's like F1, F2, F3 or something. So yeah, so the polygon one is really awesome. And I didn't know about the UV one. I'm really glad you mentioned this. It's a lifesaver. If you like you mentioned, like you could use that as a strategy. So when you're UVing your object, you could, you can have that as one of the strategy. I'm just gonna use substance and I'm gonna rely heavily on the UVs, and that could be a really nice way. It's like that's the beauty of substance. It offers you multiple approaches. Thank you.
Yeah. If I was doing this with like an actual model that I cared about, I would definitely do custom UVs and then separate materials by their UV shells, because that's like an instant way to get really nice material definition at this stage. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. I'm just being a little bit lazy, I guess. And sometimes you don't always just get models with the best UVs, so sometimes you have to, just deal with it and paint it. So one thing to say about so brush painting, with so Substance Painter's default brush is like this. By the way, the brush tools are the same as Photoshop, bracket and like right click. So the default brush is this really smooth kind of gradient from like full strength to no strength. And that's actually pretty bad for texture painting, because often nothing in real life is really like a gradient. Like there's always like harsh edges to things in real life. So you always want a pretty hard brush when painting. You don't need it 100%, but like I pretty much always use a pretty hard brush, because that just looks a lot more natural, because you want sharp edges between your different features, right? That's what I normally go for. So right now I'm just going through and tracing out the different materials that I'm going to do. So I'm just following the curve of the belly here. If you're wondering, you've probably seen this model before, because it's one of the standard the Stanford College 3D scans. I'm sure you all have seen like the bunny and like those before. They're used a lot in like tech demos. So I just grabbed one of those because they're nice and high resolution. I actually had to decimate this just so it would fit into Substance Painter. So audience participation time. How many of you have used like Substance Painter before?
Phil made us use it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I have,
we've used it
in
before.
there.
Cool.
Maybe one day.
Okay. So a lot of you have at least touched it before, which is good. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good that we're definitely covering it more in the curriculum because it is used. Basically, every job that I've seen being posted for has like a Substance Painter component to it. Between like environment jobs, wanting it for like environment modelers, it's used a lot in characters still. Like I feel like pretty much every specialization uses Substance Painter, like at least a little bit.
Yeah, you guys can think about it as like just like when when you go to interview and they would ask you, have you worked with a group before? It tends to be, even though you're completely innocent and you haven't done anything wrong, it tends to be somehow a red flag if someone hasn't worked on a group project. So nowadays, if you haven't worked on Quixel or Substance Painter, it's usually like, oh, it's almost like, oh, it's almost like an artist saying that I've never used Photoshop. So it has become to the ridiculous point of a red flag because it's an incredible software. So definitely you guys should at least consider like playing around with it. So at least you wouldn't be lying when you tell your future employer that you have tried Substance. And also like it's a big part of our learning curve is to never rely heavily on just one software or invest all our time into one software. You need to know as many as possible at the very least, so we would stay flexible and learning more things. So it's definitely a really good software worth your investment. The other software I mentioned, you might have not heard about it. It's called Quixel, and I believe it's available for free thanks to Epic Games that have included it in the package with Unreal. And they also offer like mega scans, which means like, photogrammetry assets via Quixel and the whole package between them and Epic. So it's, if you haven't tried, I might be wrong about Quixel, the fact that it's free. But
Quixel is free if you're using with Unreal Engine. If you're using it like just for Arnold or something, you have to pay for it, but like they're not going to hunt you down.
Yeah, so it's really worth considering that you at least kind of work with Substance a little bit. Now, when you go into Substance Designer, that's a little too specific, and more specification is better for like hunting specific jobs sometimes. But to put it simply, you definitely want to have Substance Painter written on your resume, like some experience in it, at least.
Yeah. And it's probably good to know just for yourself anyway. I think of it a lot as like how it's said that like Photoshop is like your kind of multi-tool for 3D. I think of Substance Painter as Photoshop, but better for 3D models. So I feel like it's just good to know if you ever have to deal with textures, really. Yeah. Mask. If you're wondering, I am just doing this with my mouse. All of this is easier if you have a graphics tablet, but I'm not very good with them. So Substance Painter is still very usable if you just use a mouse. It just is a little bit annoying sometimes, but it's still perfectly usable.
So I just two things. First of all, for my class, you had asked who's used Substance before. And for my class, if you could just put in the chat, a 1 if you're got a lot of experience, a 2 if you've opened it up and tried it, and a 3 if you've got like no experience, because that'll help me work on the next projects. Also, I think Joey has a question. He's got a hand up. And Ehab, if you could check your direct message, please. So one is nothing, right? That's what I said.
You said one. You know a lot of things, David.
One is lots, okay, and then 2 is a little bit, and 3 is none, right? Is that what I said?
Well, we can go with that. And same for my class, in case this could be helpful, maybe.
Yeah. Always good for a record. Did someone have a question?
I thought I saw Joey Parenti had his hand up.
Might have just been for my last question.
Oh,
Yeah, I actually have a quick question real quick.
Yeah.
How will you know which type of mask to apply to each layer as you work along? Or you just trial and error?
So right now I'm just doing a basic painting mask. And so for that, I just go with the black mask. So black mask and white mask are the same. It just changes where you start from. If I was using a white mask, I'd have to paint everything else, everything that's not the material, which is a lot more. So I just went with black mask so I can only paint what I want. Is that your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now we've got the materials painted out in these like cartoonish colors. But now that they're separated, we can really see like, these are the materials that we're going to be working with for like the foreseeable future. Okay. So yeah, now that we've got the basic layers set up, we can actually go and make the layers like actually look how we want. So to do that, we can just go into the folders that we already made and just layer things on top of each other, basically. We're developing this layer stack to create like these nice just deep materials, so that it's not just, oh, this is solid steel or whatever and it's nothing else. We want like layers of detail on top of each other. So first we'll work with the brass. Substance Spinner has this built-in materials tab. It's got materials and it has smart materials. The difference is, so smart materials are a layer stack built into itself. So these have like a lot of different features and a lot of things playing with each other, but that also makes them really complicated and kind of specific. So I pretty much only use like the basic materials. If I'm going for something really specific, I'll use a smart material. But these are a lot easier for me to play with from a starting point. So we've got brass. So we want something, yeah, they've just got brass. So I'm gonna click and drag it over into the stack. And we've got brass. So I'm going for like if you remember the origin, kind of an older corroded brass. And this is pretty shiny and almost gold. So I think I'm gonna make it a bit darker. So you can just click on the color and take down how bright it is and adjust what kind of color you want. That's almost like bronze, and I think I kind of like that more. I'm just gonna pretend that I was going for bronze the whole time. Which I think is a good tactic. So we've got this bronze kind of base, and I want it to be a bit like corroded, like it's been out, like it's been well loved, so it's been corroded for a little while. So there's not really like corrosion. There is rust, but it's a little bit specific, and bronze. Well, let's look up some reference. As always, reference is your friend. So, okay. So bronze statues, they're kind of this dark color, and then they ended up rusting like kind of this greenish, which is really interesting. So this is kind of what we want to try to go for with our material. So I'll just hide this, but it's still up. So
Is that due to oxidation of something?
yeah, so copper-based things, which bronze is an alloy of copper, will always oxidize like a bluish green. It's only iron that oxidizes to red.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna take this rust. Which kind of rust do I want?
And at any point, Morgan, feel free to call for a break.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this does have a color control, so I can just make this. Yeah, like this teal. So we have. Okay, so
Maybe
we've got
just
this brass.
Just a tiny more blue, just a little bit more blue to get that
Yeah,
color you were
that's a
looking
good idea.
for. If you increase the, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So we've got this like corrosion layer. Oh, let me make it bigger. So we've got this corrosion layer, and we've got the pure brass, but we have to figure out some way to like interpolate between them to say like, oh, it's mostly brass, but there's also some corrosion in there. So first we want to think about where statues actually corrode. So it looks to me like they corrode in the hidden areas, specifically ones that are kind of like the ones that face the weather the most. So it kind of accumulates, but also like on outward facing surfaces. So for that, so we're going to use a mask for that. We could just do like the add black mask and just paint into it again. But that would take a very long time to paint everything. So I'm going to use a smarter method with a smart mask. So we want something outward facing that also kind of accumulates. And so looking through this gallery, we could do surface worn. That kind of looks like rust. They've got actual rust, which we could do. But to get some of the like weathered, like outward facing weathered effect, I kind of want to try this moss and just see how it looks. So you can just click it and drag it on. And so this is our new effect. So we've got the brass, but also where it's more facing the weather, it gets a lot more corroded. So how does this look? I think that's pretty good. I think I want more in the creases, like especially the tiny creases like in here. So let's see how we can do that. So the mask builder is where you go to manipulate smart masks. It has a lot of parameters, but usually you only need to deal with levels and contrast unless you have something specific in mind. And I'm also going to turn on triplanar. So the way that triplanar works, instead of using the UVs, instead of just stamping it directly onto the UVs like from the top, using triplanar will project the texture from 3 dimensions. And so if your UVs are a little bit sketchy like mine are on this, using triplanar will give you a more kind of cohesive grunge to things. And we can talk more about the specifics of that in a bit. So if I just wanted more rust, we could go to this little levels slider and change that. And if you wanted more, like a harsher blend between bronze and the corrosion, we could do the contrast slider where it's more tightly packed into itself, or if it spreads out a little bit. I thought it was fine where it was. So we can dial it back a little bit. But I specifically wanted more rust in the creases. So we're gonna go and look for this AO. So ambient occlusion kind of says things where to accumulate in the creases, basically, because you remember we baked that out and told it where the crevices were. So we can kind of just play with these sliders and see what gets us more of what we want, that's pretty close. I think I want to contrast that a bit. So a lot of this process is just changing sliders. You don't really know what they do and seeing what happens. Over time, you'll get a feel for like what things change what, but a lot of the times it's just experimentation and playing. Like a lot of this process is iterative where you play with different things and see how they end up looking. So I think this looks pretty good for a weathered bronze statue that was just left out. So I'm going to leave this how it is for now and move on to the next material. So we've got this whole layer stack, and we can just collapse it and go on to the next one. I think that's a good place to have like a 5-minute break, I think.
Yeah, sure. We can take 10 if you want.
Yeah, let's do 10.
Yeah, and when we're back, if you can just show them how sometimes we can start with like a black or white mask. In the case we want to just kind of focus on the smaller areas versus the larger areas. That would be a good kind of recap.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay,
I'll definitely
guys.
get to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, okay, guys, so it's going to be a 10-minute break. See you soon.
Yeah. So is anyone actually like following along at home, or is this just like me showing off stuff?
I'm following along.
I am following
Okay.
along as well.
I'm
Cool,
following
wonderful.
along.
Cool. Good job, guys.
Great to hear. Am I going too fast, too slow, like for you all to follow?
It's been good for me so far.
Wonderful. Okay.
Morgan, I have a question for you.
Yeah, what's up, David?
So when you're choosing these basic materials like brass or bronze or gold,
Yeah.
is it possible to reverse engineer those so that you can put in the actual RGB values of the F0 or look at material definition languages to plug in the numbers? That's question number one. And question number two is it possible to bring in your own pattern, like a noise map or a fractal map, and multiply that by the baked ambient occlusion to make your own patterns for smart masks?
Okay, so your first question, yeah, you can totally like in my bronze, if I went into like the base color, I could just take like, I know that they've published RGB values for different metals and stuff, so I could definitely just take that and put it in. I'm going for a little bit of like not stylized, but like a Disney level of artistic license.
No, I get it. You're being visual as opposed to scientific. I totally appreciate that. I was just wondering if the other was possible. So
yeah, but you definitely can like look it up and just plug in those values down here if you wanted like a perfectly accurate brass or copper or steel or aluminum or whatever. And for your second question, so smart masks are built out of this mask builder, and this mask builder just takes a bunch of parameters and mixes them together with various sliders. So if I wanted to, I could put whatever texture I wanted into this image input, and then that noise would be considered for the different sliders and stuff. So you could replace this texture with literally anything you want.
Gotcha.
And then you could have that as a smart mask.
Cool. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So you finished up the bronze. So one thing I wanted to show off that I forgot about. So how to manipulate smart masks to like your own artistic purposes. So like we've got this automatic result, but automatic results don't really tell human stories. Like they're just, this is what would happen, but it doesn't really say like, this is why things happened. Like it doesn't really give off any of the human qualities because it just considers itself. And human qualities are the only important thing for storytelling, basically. So we're gonna say how we can give some artistic control in this. So just like we did for the material and masks, we're going to add a paint on top of this. So nothing changed, but you can paint directly on this to either add corrosion, or so adding corrosion would be white, and then black would be removing corrosion. White adding things, black removing things for mask purposes. So I want to make it so that every day someone passed by this this dragon statue, and just like rubbed its nose or rubbed its horn. So I'm going to use just painting on top to add the kind of like human touch to how people have actually interacted with the statue. So I could just go in and paint it like this, but that's like a very sharp, like that's not really how things get worn. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the alpha of the brush that I'm using. So which of these would make for good wear? It also automatically adds all your Photoshop brushes. So if you have a nice Photoshop brush library, you can use them directly in Substance, which is pretty cool. And sometimes they have unsupported features, but that doesn't really matter. That one's, I like that one. Can I just click on? Okay. Yeah, you just click on it and then it's added to your brush. And now I have this much more natural kind of wearing edge pattern. I can just paint this on wherever I don't want corrosion to be. And if I want corrosion to be somewhere else, I can just paint it on, using X to switch the color. I'm just going to go through and add where people would have pet the dragon. I took that a little bit too far, so I'm going to add some of it back. I'm just using a mouse for this. This part's a lot easier with the graphics tablet.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say it's quite painful with the mouse, but it also shows how effective Substance that even with the mouse you get some interesting results.
Yeah, it's definitely still a capable program without the mouse. It's just nicer to have a bit more of that 2D control.
And more fun, much more fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Add a little bit back into the nostrils. Yeah, David, that was kind of my inspiration of like, thinking about how people touch statues. That or like all the religious ones where like the feet or the hands have been like kind of worn away and uncorroded. So it's interesting to think about those kind of things.
It's a great observation, to put into this tutorial, into this demonstration.
I'm going to turn down the opacity a bit because sometimes I don't want to remove all the corrosion, just like, get the feeling that that's where it's been touched. And it's nice to build up the layers gradually instead of having to worry about, stripping away everything at the same time. Because I want to make this a little bit softer too. This stuff kind of corrodes gradually. So it's nice to have like a little bit of sharp edges, but also the corrosion slowly creeping up. There. Looks pretty nice. Okay, so I think that's the bronze pretty well taken care of. So now for the onyx. Nick, to invert the brush, it's just the hotkey X. That just changes here. Yeah. So you can use X to just swap this little gradient here. Or you can just slide it manually if you want some in-between color. Yeah. Yep. All the brush controls I think are identical to Photoshop. They feel similar to me, so. Okay. Onyx. So Substance Painter has, some stone materials, but they don't have a lot of selection. Yeah, I don't even see any glancing through. So I'm going to use some outside textures. So I'm just going to go to smaller. So you can plug in any textures you want. I just use textures.com for a lot of this basic stuff. You can also get these textures from Quixel, which is probably where I'll be getting them from in the future because it's just better. So I'm looking for some onyx dark kind of stone. And it's important to make sure that it has the base color, but also the roughness and normal, if that's important. So we're going to go into their PBR materials and look for probably marble. So this has, you know, because we're just looking at them, there's a lot more options than Substance Painter has built in. So let's see. Onyx is kind of a dark. Okay.
And I want to mention, for those who are not familiar with the website, I often talk about it. You need to subscribe in order for you to get weekly or monthly credit, and you can use that credit to download textures. So really amazing textures, as you can see. So it's like, it would be a waste. I used to go like log in every week just to download anything, use my credits. I mean, this is what you gotta do as a student, or even as an independent artist. You gotta do these things, and it's like, it would be, you know, a big waste if you don't take advantage of it. Along, of course, with HDRI Haven, and that one is fully free, but it's for 360 images.
Yeah. So this method will work with like any texture site. Kevin reminded me of CC0 textures, which I do like a lot. I think that they had a lot of wood types, which I liked. See if they have any good marbles. I actually like this one a lot. Yeah. So I'm just gonna go ahead and download everything for this. Yeah, but this method will work with like textures.com, CC0. It works with Quixel textures. As long as you have like the PBR texture set, like you can do this method with anything. You just have to plug them in right. So we've got the download. I'm just gonna take them. Nope, stay back. So you can just drag and drop them. No, I've done zip it first. To marble. There we go. Okay. So now that they actually exist, I can just drag and drop them into the content browser. And we've got this little pop-up that's saying, what did you just put into me? And I say, we put textures into you. Texture. And then you can just choose where you're actually saving them to. So current session, it'll be just the window you have open currently. If you put it into your project, it'll be saved with your project file, so you can always go back into them. Or you can save them to your shelf, so you can have them for any Substance Painter thing you want. I usually do project, because that makes sense. And then they'll show up in here. So we've got these textures for our Onyx, so we have to actually apply them to the material. So we're going to make a new fill layer. So fill layers are kind of just a basic, like they're kind of the basic layer where you can do all these different manipulations, but just kind of to itself. But we can plug in textures to them, which is what we're using them for. So we have to go to, okay, the color goes into color. Displacement goes into height. Normal goes into normal, and roughness goes into roughness. And metallic stays at 0 because it's not metal. So we've got this texture. The height is pretty intense. So I'm going to, so the way to make things like more or less intense, I usually just add another fill layer on top, make it affect only the height. To have it affect only certain channels, you can just turn them on or off on this panel. And okay, so right now it's not doing anything. That's because the normal way for Substance Painter to blend height is to just add them together, which isn't what we want. We want to replace them for this circumstance. So instead of, so just like Photoshop, you can change blending modes just over here. But this, right now we're on base color. We want to manipulate how the height is blending. So we're going to change this down to height, and you can see that they're just adding them together with a linear dodge is why it's called that. We want to change it to replace. So that gets rid of all the height information, but we probably wanted like a little bit of it. So I'm just going to turn down the opacity and get some of that interesting like cracking effect. I think there is nice. So now we've got this kind of nice shiny stone, but it also has some of that height detail still inside of it. how do you enable displacement? Are you talking about like actual like displacement on the model or the texture displacement? Kevin. I'll just show both. So right now it's using height as like a texture. So it's just kind of adding that to the normal. If I want the displacement to actually exist on the model, like you would with like a displacement, like if you want a geometry displacement, we've got over here, there's like random other settings. But if we go into the shader settings, we've got this whole pop-up box. And so we've got down here, we've got displacement and tessellation. So we can either do the geometry one, which is displacement and tessellation, or we can do the cheaty way, which is parallax occlusion mapping. Unreal Engine supports parallax occlusion mapping, so that's the one I know best. So I'm just gonna turn on that one. So it doesn't show very much because we only have a little bit of height information. But yeah, it doesn't really show much yet. But if we had like a really strong height, like a height map, like bricks or something, that would really show in this, and it would show like the cracks in the bricks, but in like a cheap kind of way that Unreal Engine supports. If we went down here and turned this up, you would see that it's actually displacing the model and affecting the height of the actual geometry, which is good if you have the kind of resolution to support that. But this kind of doesn't. So I'm just going to turn that off and leave it with the cheaty way that lets us still support it with game engines and stuff. I hope that was a decent explanation. It's kind of confusing. Okay. So I think the onyx is looking pretty nice. Since it's stone, it won't really degrade or anything, so we're not going to add like rust or anything on top. So I'm just going to leave it how it is as a standard just stone material. It's kind of shiny. Is that too shiny? Maybe a little bit. Okay. Substance Painter autosaves. That was the pop-up. Okay. So we had that height manipulator, but we can also have it change roughness as like another layer on top. So like there. I like that. But I still want it to have some influence from the roughness map below. So I'm just going to turn it down like to half to just slightly even out the roughness a bit. And I think that looks nicer. Not quite those mirror sharp reflections. Okay. Bronze is done. When you change this channel, the examples will also change. So you can just look at, oh, this is what the height looks like for all of them, which is interesting. Okay, so now we've got wood. Substance Painter has a few woods, but I think they're actually pretty nice. I really like the walnut. That just has a really nice kind of grain texture to it. Like a little bit finer grain, but I think it's nice. And I use it for a lot of things. I'm just gonna throw that in the stack. Let's look at this. It's a little bit too big. So often when you add in materials, they'll have all these parameters, which you can kind of just adjust. So let's see. I want more rings, so I'll just dial that up a whole bunch. Bit rougher. And I want the color to be kind of like a red, like almost like cherry, I think. So I want like a reddish kind of wood. Not like that. Yes. Yeah, like that. So you'll notice that with the tongue, so wood has a grain, and the grain really determines how people use it to build with things. Like if you know anything about woodworking, the wood grain matters a lot for both aesthetics and also just like structural integrity. So you want to be really careful about how your wood grain is looking on your models. And I think Gary often gets mad about that. So Yeah. So the wood grain on the tongue looks weird because if I was actually building this, I'd want the wood grain to run along the tongue just because that looks normal. So to fix that, so right now it's using UV projection, and I'm going to change it to triplanar because that'll be the first step to making it look like it's all one solid piece of wood without like joins or anything. So I've got that, but it's still kind of going in a weird diagonal direction for the tongue. So can I just, yeah, so I'm just going to rotate it. Using this slider, I can make it bigger or smaller. I'm going to take it the same. But I can also rotate it. Like there? Yeah, so it looks a lot more natural for the wood, I feel, having it run that direction. And on the tail, it still looks nice because I think it's just like an arbitrary piece that someone carved. So I think that's good for the direction of the wood. But since this is an older statue, it's kind of strange for the wood to be so crisp and perfect. So I'm going to be adding some like scratches and like edge wear where it got a little bit dinged up. So to do that, I'm just going to duplicate this layer because when wood gets dinged up, it's kind of just scraping off the surface of it and making it rougher. So I duplicated it. I can go into the settings and make it just a bit brighter. So now we're looking at the wood, how it'll look when it's worn. And we're going to use another mask to make it so it's just the scratches. So that looks pretty good for like a scratched up wood. And then we'll make it rougher because, you know, scratches are always pretty rough. Yeah. And I'll just go in, add, let's do a smart mask because that makes more sense. Let's see if there's any of these good ones with scratches because I think scratches will be like the interesting part. So this is interesting. This is fabric, which like, you know, obviously this isn't fabric, but it has a lot of this nice kind of long scratchy, I guess they're meant to be threads, but it makes sense for it to be wood damage. So I'm going to try that. And now it looks like it's gone, but that's just because it's probably not strong enough of a mask. So I'm going to go back into the mask editor and make it stronger. So yeah, like that. The tongue might be better to look at. Yeah, so how it's all scratched up at the edge of the tongue, but relatively undamaged inside the mouth, that's kind of exactly what we want. I want... Yeah, and it's just filling with sliders because that's most of what Substance Painter is. Okay, so the scratches. Is that too much? Not really. Okay. That looks pretty good, but now I've got this edge seam in here, so I'm trying to see if there's a way to get rid of that.
Is that in the blending of the triplanar map?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Because I think it's just taking the UVs, and I remember the tongue having some bad UV seams. Is it here? Not really. Oh, it might just be part of the UV being bad. So we might just have to live with it. You know, looking at it from this distance, you won't really notice it anyway. So sometimes you also have to consider, is it worth dealing with this or not? Because nobody's going to be up in here with your model. Like, you know.
Actually,
I think that really makes a strong case for, planning out what you're going to do. And I know you just sort of jumped into this model and you explained that it wasn't one that you really cared about and all of that. So I think that's fine. Yeah. But for a model that you do care about, you really want to understand exactly what's going on with the tongue and the tail and the seams in between, and make sure that your UVs are laid out.
Yeah, if this was like a hero asset where I know people are going to expect it, I would honestly just go back into your 3D editor and just redo the UVs. Because if you change the UVs, you can just export it back into Substance and it'll get it pretty close to how it was before. So you'll lose a bit of time, but you can still go back and edit the UVs in the middle of the project if you want to.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that this is a really good issue that came up because one of the things that I find really important is that there are two things I just want to mention. The first one is oftentimes we get so excited about Substance and we jump right into like painting and then it doesn't work. So one of the things that happens usually is that people over excitement, they forget to bake the textures, which was the first step that Morgan demonstrated. So make sure you always do that and keep that in mind. And the other thing is that oftentimes we think we have gotten everything down to the last bit of detail, and then like something like, oh, this is horrible. Well, the beauty about this workflow is that you can always go back to the 3D object, modify the UVs, and then go to the configuration and update that object. And oftentimes it may take you some time to figure that out. So if you can, Morgan, just kind of show briefly at least where the tab is for updating the object, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So if I had gone and fixed the UVs in whatever 3D editor, so you go to Edit, Project Configuration, and this basically reopens the tab you had when you first started the project. So if you want to change out, like refresh the model, you can just go to Select and then choose the model again. And then by doing that, it'll recalculate all of your textures and everything. So it'll kind of reset. Like you might lose a little bit of work. Stuff might be in a little bit of weird place, but usually even if you change the UVs, it'll still look 99% how it's supposed to.
And sometimes even it would be functional beautifully, even if you change, like for instance, if you combine geometry or you separate geometry, like make some drastic changes, it works really beautifully.
Yeah, the only thing that'll really mess up Substance Painter getting back to where you are is if you drastically change the bounding box of the object. Like if you add something really big to the side, it'll kind of mess up where it's calculating everything from. So everything might be shifted a little bit. But even then you'll have like your layer stack and everything in place. So you'll just have to go back and edit the mask painting that you did. So you'll still have like a good 80% even if it messes up. You just need to go back in and repaint like the masks and everything. So yeah, I think that wood's looking pretty decent. That's about what I had in mind for it. So I think all that's left is the glow and then like final polish. So for glowing, we can just keep using this full layer. So to glow, I want to use in the shader, like in emission, like that's the normal way to make things glow. But you'll notice that there's no, option for emission here because that's not standard PBR texture that everything needs. So I can just go over here and add emission to my channels. So I've got all the basic ones, but I want to go ahead and add, and there's all these options in emissive. So now when I go back, you'll see that now I have emissive here. So I'm just going to turn that on and I can say what color of emission it is. Let's do. So you'll notice that it doesn't really look different. That's because Substance Painter doesn't really show like post-processing or lighting or anything. So it's just kind of the same color without shading. You'll see if I turn it off, you'll have like more shadows underneath it. But when I turn it on, a lot of that shadow kind of goes away. And that's the only way you really know that it's emissive. But it'll show up when you plug it in, like into the shader. Like it'll still be there. It's just not really being displayed.
Does it show in the Substance rendering?
I'm not sure. I don't really play with Substance rendering much.
Oh, it's
I'm pretty
pretty
sure...
awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
I really recommend that you guys like try it. It's just fabulous. It has some really cool features that it would work really beautifully to the point that it would give you the final pixel quality that you may need.
Yeah, it is definitely nice. I just haven't really played with it much because I use other rendering engines.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on. It's not really like what you aim for usually in the way that we deal with geometry and all that.
Yeah, it is nice to like test out things Looker if you want just like some portfolio renders of something you textured.
Yeah.
So anyways, so you've got this model. We've got all these separate materials, but it doesn't really look like cohesive. It's kind of just a bunch of random materials on an object. And so the way that I'm going to try to make it look like all together, like it's lived together for a while, is I'm going to add like a bit of a dirt pass on top. Just add like, you know, some grunge, like it's been covered in dust and like, okay, so it's weathered. So it's been out in the weather for a little while. So it probably got a little bit dirty at some point. So I'm going to add dirt kind of on top of everything so that it all gets like tied together and feels like it's one actual object. So that's new material. So we're going to do a new folder like we've been doing. Call it dirt. And I believe they have some dirt materials. Maybe not. So a big part of dirt and like mud and stuff is that it has like the color variation. So it's pretty important to use a texture rather than just like a fill layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the textures website and just get some more.
I think you may find it in the smart materials.
Yeah, I know that the smart materials has some dirt things, but I don't know. I don't really love smart materials because they're so complicated sometimes.
They're very complex, and next thing you know, like just too many things going on. I usually, the last time I tried it, it was more like applying it as a filter, and it was pretty awesome, really quick and easy.
Yeah.
But I mean, like Substance is really like it. You there's no way you could just possibly like cover everything, even like in 1 week or two. But you know, these things, like at least if even we're just talking about them, they're like key aspects for you guys to research and look into. So it's, you know, it's definitely worth looking into like how these things work. In terms of the smart materials, they are complicated. They are over the top sometimes, and like you don't want to just kind of like, oh, I have no idea how this happened. But what you want to do is you want to learn from them. So what you would do is like reverse engineering, just like we learned from the preset materials from Arnold, for instance. You apply the material and then you look on the attributes like, oh, I see how the nesting works here, and I see how many layers they had created here and what kind of attributes that have changed.
Yeah, because smart materials are really only just like a packaged up version of one of these folders. Like they're just another like layer stack you can add in. Like I've even made my own for a couple of purposes. Like this one I've added in because you can just export them and share them with people. But I'm just gonna use textures for this.
The risk of using the default materials in any software is that it tends to get a signature. And if you don't reverse engineer and modify to your own aesthetic, people will look at this and say, oh yeah, it's very substancy.
Yeah, because you can definitely like, I've become familiar enough to know like what the default smart materials look like, and I can, you know, notice them sometimes when people use them. So I've just gone ahead and found a mud texture that I like. So I'm just applying this to a new fill layer in my folder. Oh, not metallic. Yes. Okay. So now we're designing what the statue would look like if it was completely dirty. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to change this to triplanar because that's just better. So yeah. If it was completely covered in mud and dirt, this is the statue would look like. But obviously, we don't want the entire thing covered because that's silly. So I'm just going to go ahead and find a nice smart mask to use with it, and then we can go ahead and edit that. So if it's been outside a while, it's probably mostly dirty from the ground. So I'm going to get, well, which one of these do I like? I think this one looks nicer. Just going to drag that on, and it's pretty close already. I'm going to go ahead and tweak it a little bit because I think I want maybe a little bit more. So I can just change this balance slider to go a little bit higher. Yeah, I think that's pretty nice. Okay. One thing that I want to change with it is it's got these kind of bare patches like in between the toes and stuff, and I think it should be more like kind of a solid mud dirt layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint in some. So I could just go in and brush it in with this. Oh, no, like no. Okay. For some reason, I thought that the material that I was using before was what I wanted. Okay, so now it'll paint in the dirt. Yeah, okay. So just want to go ahead and paint it in to the gaps. So I could brush it in like this, but I also want to show off particle brushes. So particle brushes are a way to use physics to paint on your model. And so you've got all these different kind of options for different physics simulations you can use with your brush. I usually stick to leaks and stream and splat because usually you just need to like kind of splash something onto the model. But if you have more specific or global ideas, you can use these other ones. So let's try leaks. So you can see now those particles are kind of following the curvature of the mesh. So it kind of makes it pool in ways that like dirt or mud naturally would, like as it slides down the model. That's a little bit heavy. So you can kind of just paint it where you want and then it'll flow to where it naturally would. And by using this kind of physics, you don't have to do as much manual thinking about it. You can kind of just define where it goes and it'll worry about where everything else for you, which I think is nice. Kind of just paint it in there. And I know that it has like physics settings, but the defaults are pretty good. And usually you don't need to adjust it that much. I'm just covering up all the gaps that I don't really like, especially in here. Okay. I think that's pretty good. And one other thing that I wanted to show off. So sometimes you have like instances where you want like a decal applied to the surface, like I'm sure you've seen like in sculpting where you've got like air vents or like pores or something, like just little details on you want to stamp onto the surface like in specific areas. So for this instance, I'm going to add like a little like maker's mark that the sculptor would have stamped into the surface of it. So to do that, we're just going to add a fill layer into this folder. So maker's mark, they're just stamped into the surface, so it only affects the height. So only height, and maker's marks, they're stamped down. So for visualization purposes, I'm just going to move it all the way down. So now we've got this kind of invisible layer that makes everything kind of pressed in. So we're going to add in a mask so that it's only pressed in where we want that mark. So we're going to just add a black mask, add paint to it. So I want the maker's mark to just be like a little like initials. So I'm going to go into alphas, and down here they've got various fonts. Fonts are just text that you can change the text of. So I'm going to go for typewriter because this is a bit of an older statue. And somewhere in here, okay, we've got the font settings. So I'm going to change this to LMR, and we can already get to see the preview of how this is going to look. The brush settings are making it like jump around a lot, so I'm going to just turn off whatever brush settings there are. Oh, it's because it's a physics brush.
It's the alignment probably, right? Don't you want to make that world space?
Not world space. It's because it's like rotating randomly. So I need to turn off that. So I'm just going to choose some other brush that doesn't have that and then turn off all the settings. Keep that, turn that off. Basically just turning off all the jitters is the important part. Wrap, object. Okay, and now we can actually set it back to the alpha that we wanted. There we go. Okay. So now we've got this little maker's mark that we can just add wherever we want. Stamp it in. I'll stamp it in a couple places. So now we've got this little maker's mark added in, but especially down here, it's a little bit too heavy. So to reduce the heaviness, we can just go into the fill layer and just make it not quite that dramatic. So using this slider, we can now change if we want it pressed in, if we want it pressed out, and how heavy we want it to be. And I want it to be kind of on the subtle side. So I think I want it like that. And so the nice thing about doing the mask instead of just directly painting this on is that we can change the height, or we can do like fill it with black ink if we wanted. So we can do all these like procedural changes and it'll change it across the entire model and it'll just be good. Like it'll automatically update it wherever we want. So I think that's pretty good for the dragon model. Is there anything else you wanted to see in Substance Painter before I take it into exporting it out?
Can you paint those instead of using an alpha? Like what I'm thinking is that you want to differentiate, say, between the wood of the tongue and the brass of the jaw, right? And right now,
Right.
the textures aren't really creating that distinction. So in a ZBrush workflow, I would carve that out, you know, with a brush and make an indent. But can you use a brush just with this alpha? And create that indentation?
Yeah, because alphas are just like normal brushes. So I could just use like a normal, you know, ink brush or whatever and just go in there and carve stuff out if I wanted. It's looking black because I filled this with black. Go back. Yeah, so I could just go in there and carve stuff out if I wanted. You know, because it's all brushes. It's just if you want to use an alpha for the brush or not. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it was perfect.
Wonderful. So yeah, so if there's anything else you want to see, you can just say it. Otherwise, we'll go into the next steps, which is exporting it out into our engines. Okay. All right. I'll just assume everyone's good then. I think we should take another few minutes break.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's take maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I should have recorded that. Cool. Awesome.
That's all right.
All right, thanks. Let's go ahead with plugging things into Unreal and Maya. Or let's start with Maya first and then Unreal. And then if we have time for Blender, maybe.
Yeah, it'll be pretty quick to show them. It's pretty simple. So to actually export everything, File, Export Textures, and then you've got this nice window. All of the, this is where you tell it to export. I'll go ahead and tell it the correct answer. This should already say PBR metallic roughness because we set that at the start. If not, you can just change it in here. File type, how many bits of depth you want. PNG and 8 bits are fine. Texture size is how large you want to export it. Let's do 2048. that can change. That can differ from what you've been working in. It'll recalculate everything to export it anyway. So you can have it be whatever size you actually need it for. Padding, just keep it on dilation infinite. I've never needed anything else. So using this output template, it basically just says what textures it's putting out and what like where they're coming from. So in this window, you usually don't need to touch it, but you can change like specific settings if you need to for something. So it's saying like how it's going to be named, and then where those names are coming from. Usually you can just leave it at the defaults, but if you need a special template, like a special naming convention or something, this is where you would change that.
Sorry, if I may just add one thing to that.
Yeah.
Notice, guys, how by default the height maps are given higher bits. So especially when you're working with something like displacement map, it's actually creating the geometry based on the data that you're providing it. And for that reason, it's really important to give as potentially as high as your computer can handle. But the common, extremely horrific mistake that people do is that they would just spit out all the high resolution, crazy high bit depth from Substance, and then you don't really get the benefit of higher bits unless we're talking about something like height map. Especially like when we're talking about like a normal or displacement map, because it's really helpful to have higher bits, but it's extremely terrible if you don't need those. It would just be incredibly taxing on you. So generally speaking, I would say always have your texture files, and that even includes like, for instance, like some of other maps, not just necessarily the albedo, but have it around 400K, which is extremely cheap. And a lot of people are like, oh, this is really low. But technically, you want to work economically, and only when you feel you need more, you add only then after that point. But in terms of like height maps, it's different because the data is actually transferring into geometry in the displacement map situation. So that's why you can see by default, Substance respects that. Thanks.
Yeah. So by default, Substance sets height to a 16-bit PNG. If your engine supports it, you can change it to an EXR, which has 32 bits per pixel. I'm pretty sure, I know at least some of the engines do. I'm not sure if Maya does, but that has the highest bit depth of any image. An EXR at 32 bits per pixel. I'm going to change it back because I don't know if Maya does or not. Okay. So once you've got, usually you only need to touch this stuff in here. So you can just go ahead and hit export, and it'll save it and put it out. And then you've got all the textures in your folder. So this is what it'll spit out. And this is a pretty crazy looking texture map. If you have your UVs nice, it'll look a little bit nicer, but it'll always look a little bit crazy because you never actually looked at this. You only ever looked at the 3D view. So like it'll look weird, but it should look fine once you actually plug it in. Stay there. This one. So now that we're done with Substance and everything's exported, we can go into the actual engines and say how to hook up everything. I'm going to assume you all know how to import textures and stuff into engines, so I'm just going to show you the final results and walk you through it. So for Maya, so this is how it looks rendered in Maya. This is just a basic Arnold render. So to plug everything in, okay. So I made it a new material. So we've got the color. That's just reading the base color image. You can keep all the settings the same. You've got the metalness. That's the metalness texture. Let me pull this up. Yeah. So metalness, that's plugging into the metallic texture. For that, you need to set. So for anything that's not color based, like the diffuse color or the emissive color, I always set the color space to raw. I don't know if you need to do that for the grayscale ones, but I always just do as a habit because I don't want anything messing with my data anyway. And then alpha as luminance so that it can actually read the height and roughness and metalness. Because for some reason Maya doesn't work with the grayscale images well unless you tick that. Yeah. We've got the specular roughness, which is just the roughness map. That also has to have the raw and then alpha's luminance so that Maya can read it correctly. Emission, you can just plug that right in like the diffuse color. And then for the normal map, you have to set it. You have to set it as raw. That's the important one for raw. I don't think you need that. I don't know why that's checked. And then for bump mapping, you also had to change it from bump to normal map. So like it can actually read it as a normal map, but I assume you all went over that for the screwdriver assignment. And yeah, after that, everything should be set up. Yeah. And then you've got the viewport image of it once you hit 6 on the numpad. And then you've also got the rendered view. Yeah, it's pretty easy to set the textures up. It's no different from importing like, a textures.com texture set or something. It's basically the same as what you get from textures.com. You just made it yourself just for this model. Like it's kind of the same method to actually plug it in. So that's Maya pretty well covered, hopefully. If I went too fast or if anyone has questions about Maya, feel free to ask.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
On the Arnold, the AI normal map node,
Yeah.
there is an option to invert the X, Y, or Z orientation.
Yeah.
Not the normal map in the material, but the node in the hypershade.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the way that Substance writes a normal map, if that jives with the way Arnold reads them, or if there's any inversion necessary.
Yeah. So with normal maps, there's two. There's two different flavors of normal maps. You've got DirectX and you've got OpenGL. I never remember which is which, but one of them has the green y-axis the opposite way around. So what I do is I just look at it in Maya and I tell if it looks weird or not. And if it looks weird, I try to invert it and see if that looks better. I think it's Maya where you have to invert it. I think all the other ones are fine.
Well, I think Maya you can set to either DirectX or OpenGL.
Okay, so it might be that one too.
I think that's where that difference would come up.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, but I don't use Maya very often. But I'm pretty sure you do have to set that somewhere. But yeah, so if it looks weird, invert the green y-axis and it should look better.
Yeah, you'd have to swap out that 2D bump for the normal one right at the top, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's Maya.
Awesome.
Okay. So next, Unreal.
We have about 3 minutes left. So if you think
All right.
you can do it, then that would be great. Yeah. If not, don't worry about it.
Okay. So with Maya, or Unreal, so you just make a new material. You can drag it all in. It's pretty self-explanatory. Base color to base color, metallic to metallic. The only interesting one, for emissive, if you should probably multiply it by something to turn it up or down. But yeah, you kind of just plug them in and it's simple. Nothing really special about it. So yeah, and that's how it looks. And then for Blender, Default cheating. Blender's the same. You just drag it in. Make sure to set everything besides the base color to non-color node, because otherwise it'll apply the sRGB. Same as how in Maya you have to change it to raw. It's the same thing here. Blender, you need a normal map node for the normal map. And then displacement, for the emission, it's the same as Unreal where you multiply it by a value to get it to glow different strengths. But it's pretty simple. It's the same as any other textures applying, really. And that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah. Any questions people want to ask or discuss?
Thank you, Morgan.
Thanks.
Perfect. All right, guys. So, I think it would be great. Like, my advice about this is that you're going to be thinking, if you're hesitant to use Substance, you're going to be thinking that, okay, so maybe I'll just give it a try, maybe after the semester is done, or maybe, on my spare time or something like that. But especially if you're in my class, at the very least, I would say, Morgan is always with us. So I would strongly encourage you to try out and make all the mistakes you could possibly can. And then in the lab, you could reach out to Morgan and ask them about any questions you have. And that's going to make your summer a lot more productive if you're planning on researching it. In the meantime, if you're not in my class, you can always schedule an appointment with your professors, or maybe I can help you. If not, you can always join my lab, swing by and schedule an appointment, like, just arrange with me or Morgan a time that you can talk during the lab, so you would get all your questions answered. Other than that, thank you everyone for your attention. I hope this was helpful. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you. I'll see you
guys.
in